Christmas Eve. Boston was buried under snow. Through the frosted glass of my mother's house, I saw them, my family, laughing, toasting, raising their glasses as if I had never existed. And my chair was empty. The same chair I had built with my own hands, years ago. Now it sat at the table, untouched. A silent reminder I was banned. They told me not to come, said I was not family anymore, said I had failed them. Failed them? I worked double shifts in South Boston, building their homes, paying their bills, keeping the roof over their heads when no one else would. And yet, I was erased, cast out, like a stain on their perfect holiday picture. The cold that night was brutal, but not as brutal as the silence in my chest. I walked away from that window, snow crunching under my boots, my fists clenched, my breath sharp. That was the night I made a promise. Not out loud, not in anger, but deep, quiet, unshakable. One day, they would regret this. They would look at me not as the failure, but as the man who built something they could never imagine. A billion-dollar empire, a mansion so grand, it would make their Christmas lights look like dying candles. So if you've ever been betrayed by blood, if you've ever been cast aside by the people you sacrificed for, stay with me. Because this isn't just another Christmas story. This is revenge. And if you want to hear every twist, every betrayal, every ounce of justice, subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. Christmas Eve, Boston was drowning in snow. I stood on Dorchester Street, boots sinking into ice, breath sharp against the freezing air. My mother's house glowed at the end of the block, warm, bright, alive. Through the frosted glass, I saw them, my family, laughing, passing plates, raising glasses, but one chair stayed empty, the chair I had built with my own hands, the one that was mine. Now, it sat untouched, 'cause I was banned. I pulled out my phone. The message still burned on the screen. Don't come tonight. Patrick says it's better this way. Patrick Sullivan, my brother-in-law, the man in tailored suits and fake smiles, the man who whispered poison until my own mother believed I was nothing. And tonight he had won. I pressed the phone tight in my hand, my jaw locked, my fists curled. Failure, that's what they called me. After years of swinging hammers in South Boston, after nights fixing their cars, after months paying their debts, I was the failure. Inside, the music swelled. Their laughter cut through the walls. Outside, I stood in silence, a silence colder than the storm. I turned away from the window, snow cracking under my boots, one thought burning in my chest. This was not my ending. This was the spark. One day, they would regret this. Their Christmas lights would flicker under the shadow of something greater. Not a gift, not forgiveness, but revenge. They called me a failure, but they never saw the years I carried them. My name is Sean Murphy, born and raised in Dorchester, Boston, the youngest son, the one who never left. When my father died, everything collapsed. Bills piled high, debt collectors at the door. Everyone looked away, except me. I worked double shifts on construction sites, days pouring concrete in the freezing cold, nights fixing broken pipes in South Boston basements. My hands bled so theirs could rest. When my brother couldn't pay his rent, I paid it. When my sister's car broke down, I fixed it. When my mother's roof caved in, I rebuilt it, nail by nail, beam by beam. Every scar on my hands carried their comfort. Every dollar I earned disappeared into their pockets. And yet, not once did they call me a hero. Not once did they say, "Thank you, Sean." Instead, they praised Patrick Sullivan, the charming son-in-law, the man with shiny shoes and louder stories, the man who built nothing but claimed everything. He smiled while I sweated. He dined while I starved. He whispered into my mother's ear that I was wasting my life. And she believed him. The harder I worked, the smaller I became in their eyes. Invisible, disposable, unworthy of the very family I carried. That is who I was, the forgotten son of Boston, the man they erased with a single text. But that night, standing in the snow, watching through the glass, I knew something they didn't. A man with nothing left to lose has nothing left to fear. Patrick Sullivan, my brother-in-law, the man everyone in Boston admired. He walked into every room like he owned it. Polished shoes, perfect smile, the kind of charm that made people trust him, even when they shouldn't. To my mother, he was the golden boy. To my sisters, he was the perfect husband. To the neighbors, he was the success story of Dorchester. But I knew better. Behind the smile was a snake. Patrick didn't build anything. He borrowed. He schemed. He signed papers other men worked to fill. When his business deals failed, he found someone else to take the blame. When the numbers didn't add up, he smoothed them over with another lie. And yet, he always landed on his feet, always with a drink in his hand, a story on his lips, always making me the punchline. At family dinners, he leaned back in his chair, eyes on me, and laughed. Sean's still swinging a hammer. Some people never dream bigger. The table laughed with him. Even my mother smiled. That cut deeper than any blade. Not the insult, but the silence of those I had bled for. Patrick had money. Patrick had charm. Patrick had the ear of everyone who mattered. And me? I had nothing. Nothing but the truth of who he really was. But truth, in that house, meant nothing. Because Patrick's lies were sweeter, easier, safer to believe. That's how he won. That's how he convinced my family I was worthless. Until the night he banned me. Until the night he erased me with one message. That was his mistake. Because you don't erase a man like me. You awaken him. The snow kept falling. Boston was silent, except for the bells of St. Mary's in the distance. I sat in my one-room apartment on Dorchester Avenue. The walls were cracked. The heat barely worked. The only light came from a cheap lamp flickering on the table. Dinner was a cold slice of pizza, a bottle of whiskey half empty. No laughter, no family, just me. I turned on the radio, hoping for distraction, but even that betrayed me. Christmas songs filled the air, songs of joy, family, togetherness, every lyric cut deeper than the last. I stared at the empty chair across from me, a chair with no one to sit in it, a reminder that I had no one left. I thought of my mother's smile inside Patrick's house, of my sisters raising glasses, toasting to a life that no longer included me, and I realized something. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. That truth hit harder than the whiskey, harder than the cold. For the first time, I felt the weight of silence. Not peaceful, not restful, but crushing. I clenched the glass in my hand. My reflection in the window stared back at me. Eyes hollow, jaw tight. A man stripped of everything. And yet, in that silence, something stirred. Not hope, not joy, but a fire. A fire that would never go out. A fire that would turn my loneliness into fuel. That night, in that broken apartment, I was no longer just Sean Murphy. I was the man who would make them pay. The whiskey burned down my throat, but the fire inside me burned hotter. I set the glass down. My hand shook, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Rage, the kind that doesn't explode, the kind that waits. Sharp, precise. I walked to the window of my Dorchester apartment. Outside, the snow covered every street, every rooftop, a perfect white blanket hiding the filth beneath. That's what my family had done to me. Covered their betrayal with Christmas lights and holiday songs. But I saw the truth, and I would never forget it. I pressed my forehead against the glass, breath fogging the window, and I whispered to myself, one day, they'll regret this. Not shouted, not screamed, just spoken, a promise etched in the silence. They thought I was gone, that by banning me, they had erased me, but they didn't understand. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man alive. I thought of Patrick Sullivan sitting at my mother's table, smiling, toasting, convincing them I was worthless, and I swore someday he would choke on that smile. I thought of my mother believing his lies, and I swore one day she would see who I really was. Snow kept falling, but in my chest the storm had already begun. That night, I was no longer the forgotten son. I was the man who would build something greater, a legacy carved from silence, a revenge so cold it would freeze them forever. The vow was made, but a vow means nothing without action. So I started small, a broken warehouse near the docks of South Boston, rust on the doors, windows shattered. Everyone else saw garbage. I saw a possibility. I signed the papers with money I barely had. Every dollar saved from the years of labor poured into that rotten shell. When the neighbors saw me, they laughed. Sean Murphy? Buying junk? Some men never learn. Patrick laughed too. I heard him at a family gathering weeks later. Sean's trying real estate now. He can't even pay his rent. They all chuckled. Even my mother smiled. That smile cut deeper than the snow that night. But I said nothing. Instead, I worked. I scraped paint from the walls, hammered nails into beams, dragged dumpsters full of mold and trash, day after day, alone. At night, I slept on a cot in the corner. The rats kept me company. The cold cement was my bed. And yet, I felt something new. Every swing of the hammer was louder than their laughter. Every drop of sweat was worth more than their wine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their weight. I was building something for me, and though they couldn't see it, though they mocked me, the foundation of my revenge was being set. Brick by brick, beam by beam, in silence, in shadows. What they saw as trash, I knew would become the first stone of an empire. I thought one warehouse would be enough. I was wrong. The roof leaked, pipes burst, mold crept through the walls like rot in my chest. The bank wanted payments I couldn't make. Contractors walked out when I couldn't pay. Every day felt like another stone dragging me under. I sold tools, pawned my watch, even my truck, and still the debt grew. There were nights I had nowhere to sleep, so I curled up in the back of a rusted Ford parked near the docks of South Boston, the engine long dead, the cold seeping through the metal. I lay there listening to the harbor winds, wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life. The city didn't care. My family didn't care. Patrick laughed louder than ever. Sean's a dreamer, he said at dinner parties, always chasing scraps. Some men never learn. The table roared. My name became a joke. And yet, I didn't break. Every failure carved something into me. Something harder than the bricks I lifted. Something sharper than the nails I drove. I learned where not to buy, who not to trust, what contracts to never sign. The city thought it was breaking me. Patrick thought it was proof I was worthless. But every night I spent in that frozen truck, every laugh they shared at my expense, was fuel. Fuel for the fire I carried in silence. I wasn't failing. I was learning. And soon, they would see what a man forged in failure can become. It only takes one crack in the wall to let the light through. Mine came with a warehouse on Summer Street, abandoned, boarded up. Everyone said it was worthless, but I had learned from every mistake. This time, I didn't rush. I studied the numbers, talked to the right people, waited for the right moment. Then I bought it. Cheap. Cheaper than anyone thought possible. I worked alone again, scraping walls, replacing pipes, hauling trash until my back screamed. But this time, the walls held. The roof stayed firm. And when I opened those doors months later, what was once garbage had become gold. A local tech startup needed space. They walked in, saw the polished floors, the clean offices, and signed a lease that covered every debt I had, and more. When the bank officer shook my hand, he said, "Congratulations, Mr. Murphy." Mr. Murphy. Not failure, not nobody, but Mr. Murphy. I walked out of that bank with a check in my hand. The sun hit my face different that day. Warmer, brighter. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost. Hope. But it wasn't just hope. It was proof. Proof that their laughter was wrong. Proof that Patrick's words were lies. And deep inside, I smiled. Not for the money, not for the title, but because I knew this was only the beginning. The first brick of an empire. An empire that would bury them in silence. One victory became two, two became 10. 5 years passed, and the man they once called a failure was now the name whispered in every real estate deal in Boston. I bought warehouses, I bought office buildings, I bought entire blocks. South Boston, Cambridge, Back Bay. Piece by piece, the city that once spat me out was becoming mine. Patrick's friends became my tenants. His partners became my debtors. Every signature I wrote tightened the rope around his empire, and he didn't even know it. I walked through downtown in a tailored suit. Not borrowed, not faked, earned. The same people who once mocked me stopped me on the street. "Mr. Murphy, congratulations." "Mr. Murphy, any advice for a young investor?" I gave them a smile. Small. Cold. Because I remembered. I remembered every laugh at my expense, every whisper behind my back. Now their whispers carried fear, respect, and something sweeter, regret. I built an office on the 20th floor overlooking the harbor. Every morning I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching ships move in and out of the port. The same port where I once slept in a dead truck. The same streets where they said I would never rise. And I thought, let them have their Christmas lights. Let them drink their wine. Because Boston was mine now, and soon, so would they. It happened on a gray morning in Boston. Rain against the glass of my 20th floor office. Coffee warm in my hand. Silence heavy around me. Then, a knock on the door. I turned. And there he was, Patrick Sullivan. No suit today, no polished smile. Just a man crumbling under debt. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the leather chairs, the view of the harbor, the name etched on the glass, Sean Murphy & Co. He swallowed hard, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sean, I need your help." Help? From me. The same man he mocked at dinner tables. The same failure he erased from Christmas. Now he sat across from me, hands trembling, voice low. "Investors are pulling out. The banks won't give me another loan. You've done well for yourself. Maybe you could float me. Just until things turn around." Every word was a knife twisting itself, but I stayed silent. I let him sweat, let him taste the silence he once forced on me. Then I leaned forward, calm, cold. "Patrick, do you know who holds most of your debt?" He blinked, confused, shook his head. I slid a folder across the desk. His name, his company, every loan, every late payment. His face drained of color. It was me. I was his lifeline and his noose. 1 year later, another Christmas Eve. But this time, I wasn't standing outside in the snow. I watched from a black sedan parked across the street in Cambridge. Through glowing windows, I saw them gather inside the mansion. Patrick's mansion, or so they thought. The house was lit brighter than ever. Wreaths on every door, garlands twisting up the staircase, champagne glasses raised high. My mother sat at the head of the table, my sisters by her side, and at the far end, Patrick, still pretending, still smiling. But what none of them knew was that the deed in his drawer no longer had his name. It had mine, signed, sealed, paid in full. While they decorated the tree, I signed the papers. While they wrapped gifts, I bought their house out from under them. I leaned back in the leather seat. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Sir, shall we go in?" Not yet. Not until midnight. Not until the moment was perfect. I wanted them comfortable, drunk on wine, drunk on lies, because there is nothing colder than truth served at the warmest table. I adjusted my cufflinks, straightened my tie. The same hands once cracked and bleeding from work now carried the weight of an empire. And tonight, those hands would open the door, not as the forgotten son, but as the man who owned the roof over their heads. Merry Christmas, I thought. Your world is already mine. Midnight. The bells of St. Mary's rang across Cambridge. And then, the knock on the door. The laughter stopped. Chairs scraped. Patrick frowned, confused. The butler opened it, and in walked my lawyer, black coat, briefcase in hand. The family stared. My mother's smile faded. Patrick forced a laugh. "What's this about?" The lawyer placed the briefcase on the dining table, snapped it open, pulled out the papers. Effective immediately, he said, voice steady. This property no longer belongs to Patrick Sullivan. The room froze, wine glasses lowered, forks clattered. Patrick stood, face red. That's ridiculous! I own this house. I built this house. The lawyer slid the deed across the table. My name in black ink. Sean Murphy. Gasps. Silence. Eyes turning toward me as I stepped through the doorway. I didn't shout, didn't smile. I simply walked in, coat dusted with snow, and said, "You didn't build this house, Patrick. You never built anything. I did." Patrick's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of his chair, eyes wide, mouth dry. My sisters sat frozen. My mother's lips trembled, whispering my name. The empire he paraded for years, gone. The roof over their heads, mine. The family that erased me now sat in silence, under a truth they could not escape. And in that silence, I felt justice. Cold, perfect, final. The room was silent. No music, no laughter, only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. All eyes were on me, Sean Murphy, the man they erased, the man they called a failure. I took off my gloves, placed them neatly on the table. Snow melted from my coat onto the polished floor. Patrick still stood frozen, one hand gripping the back of his chair, his face pale, his mouth opening, closing. No words came. My mother stared, eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time. Not the son who carried her debts, not the boys she dismissed, but the man who owned the roof over her head. I pulled out the empty chair, the one left open years ago when they banned me. I sat down, slow, deliberate. The weight of silence pressed down on every corner of that dining room. I looked at them, at Patrick, at my sisters, at the mother who had chosen his lies over my truth, and I spoke, my voice low, even, cold. Merry Christmas from the nobody who owns everything you built on lies. No one moved, no one breathed. Only the crackle of the fireplace filled the air. I leaned back in the chair, the same chair that once marked my absence, now a throne. For years they laughed at me. For years they erased me. But tonight, they could not erase the truth. I was still here, and I was the one who won. The fire in the hearth crackled. The clock ticked on, but no one in that room dared to speak. I leaned back in the chair, the same chair that once marked my absence. Now it held me, firm, solid, unshakable. Patrick sat slumped, hands shaking, eyes glassy with disbelief. My sisters looked down at their plates, unable to meet my gaze, and my mother, her lips trembled, caught between guilt and silence. I didn't gloat, I didn't shout. That wasn't who I was anymore. I simply let the silence do the talking, because silence was the very weapon they once used against me. And now, it was mine. Every candle flicker reminded them. Every crack of the wood in the fire reminded them. This was no longer their house. It was mine. Years ago, they banned me from this table. Years ago, they erased me with a single message. But tonight, I returned without invitation, without apology, without shame. And I sat where they said I never belonged. Not as a guest, not as a son desperate for approval, but as the man who owned it all. Merry Christmas, I repeated, calm, low, final. The words hung heavy in the air, carving themselves into the very walls of that mansion. They would never forget this night, not because of the feast, not because of the laughter, but because it was the night the forgotten son came home and became the one they could never erase again. The fire snapped, the silence held, and I knew deep down that revenge didn't heal the scars, the years of being ignored, the years of carrying their weight, the nights in the cold, the laughter at my expense. None of it disappeared tonight, but something changed. The balance, the truth. For once, I wasn't the forgotten son. I was the man who took back what was stolen. Revenge doesn't bring peace. It doesn't erase the past, but sometimes it freezes the moment. It seals the wound just enough so you can breathe again. I looked at them one last time. Patrick, broken, My mother, silent. My sisters, ashamed. And I thought, this wasn't about their approval anymore. It was about me, about finally standing where they said I never would. So I rose from the table, picked up my gloves, and walked out into the Boston night. The snow fell heavy, but for the first time, it didn't feel cold, because justice, when it finally arrives, is warmer than any fire. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family? Shut out by the very people you sacrificed for? What would you have done in my place? Tell me your story in the comments. I read them all. And if this story struck something inside you, if you want to hear more tales of betrayal, silence, and cold justice, subscribe. Because this was just one Christmas, and there are 1,000 more stories waiting to be told.